This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Sunday morning. I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Just a couple hours before the Jets take on the Jacksonville Jaguars. Kickoff time today is scheduled for 1 p.m. from Jacksonville. The game will be shown on Fox. But the big news for the Jets this weekend is coming from off the field. We now know the first couple candidates who will interview for the Jets' open general manager job. We'll get to that in a bit. But the big news this weekend came from The Athletic. Apparently, before Bill Belichick was hired as the head football coach at the University of North Carolina, he reached out to the Jets to try and gauge their interest in him being a candidate for the Jets' open head coaching job. And this has led to a lot of big reactions across the internet because Belichick, of course, is a six-time Super Bowl winning coach. He's a future Hall of Famer, one of the greatest coaches in the history of the game, but also a longtime Jets antagonist, a guy who has been pretty vocal in his distaste for this franchise and in his distaste for this owner. So on some level, people were surprised to hear that Belichick actually reached out to the Jets. I have a couple thoughts on this. Number one, again, Bill Belichick hates the Jets. So isn't it convenient that this comes out right after he becomes the head coach of North Carolina? A leak that in some ways you could argue makes the Jets look bad. It seems like a classic Belichick move. Do I believe Bill Belichick ever had any interest in being the head coach of the New York Jets? Absolutely not. But if he leaks it to the media that he reached out and the Jets blew him off, the Jets look bad. So, Bill Belichick once again finding a way to make the Jets look bad. I think part of this is probably Belichick making that calculation. Now, beyond that, what would I say? I think it's probably likely that Belichick at least reached out in a cursory due diligence way to every team with a coaching opening this year. Belichick, again, has expressed a lot of dislike towards the Jets franchise and a lot of dislike towards the owner. So that's just reaching out to them. That's just kind of taking a temperature check. For all Belichick knows, maybe he gets a response that Woody's going to sell. Of course, unfortunately, he probably did not get that response, but you always want to just check in. You don't want to rely solely on your assumptions. However, the idea that Bill Belichick reached out to the Jets and that meant he was seriously interested in the job, I don't think that's necessarily the case. You can reach out to a job you're probably going to turn down. You can reach out to people even though you'd probably turn down the job if offered, just to get a general sense of where the landscape is, get a sense of if your perceptions are correct. This seems like it was very, very cursory outreach. It was, again, due diligence. It wasn't anything approaching a serious level negotiation. It did not even result in an interview. So it sounds like this is one of those things where it was just kind of like just reaching out to touch base to see where things stood, but not necessarily an indication that Belichick was seriously interested in this job. And I think there's one way you could tell that Belichick was not seriously interested in this job. If you've been watching ESPN this season and all the other media places where Belichick's appeared, he has frequently been very critical of Woody Johnson, and rightly so. I think everything Belichick has said about Woody Johnson this season has been absolutely spot on. Woody Johnson has shown himself once again to be an abysmal owner, a guy who has no idea what he's doing running a football team, a guy who doesn't know the first thing about building a winning franchise. And I think that all of Belichick's criticisms of Woody Johnson are very, very valid. In fact, I agree with almost all of them. That said, let's think this through. If you're Bill Belichick, and if you actually wanted to be the Jets head coach, if you actually wanted to come here, would you be this critical on national television over and over of the guy who's deciding who gets hired as head coach? I think not. And all of this tells me that this was not really a serious thing, that people are kind of overblowing how significant this contact was between Belichick and the Jets. Again, it's one thing to just kind of touch base. It's another thing to be seriously interested. This sounds like it was much more of the we're just touching base variety. Just make sure we don't think this is a fit, but we'll just make absolutely sure this is not a fit. Would Belichick have been the right coach for the Jets? I'd lean towards thinking no, because I think that his tenure in New England ended very poorly. I think he can still coach, but I think, Belichick seems like the type of guy who wants total control of the organization. He wants to be the general manager. He wants his hands in everything. And while I think Belichick, the coach, is still quite good, I think, if you listen to people in the league, if you listen to people who really know the X's and O's, they tell you Belichick can still coach with anybody. The personnel job has really deteriorated near the end of his tenure with New England. He left very little behind. He made a lot of very poor and suspect decisions with the Patriots and left them in a really bad spot. Of course, they picked third overall in the NFL draft last year. So I think it's tough to argue that Belichick would be the right fit. He's also 72, and not that there's anything wrong with being 72, but you don't think he's going to be here for the long haul. I don't think he'd be the type of guy who would see a rebuild all the way through. I think he wants to win immediately because he's not going to be around that much longer. So he may not be the type of guy who has the patience to do the type of build that the New York Jets need. Look, there obviously would be some positives if Belichick was interested. It's really, I'm not even sure it's worth discussing these because it was such a hypothetical. It was never something that was very realistic. Belichick's reputation obviously precedes himself. 6 Super Bowl wins, one of the greatest coaches of all time. I mean, clearly a top 5 coach of all time. The other aspect of this is that one thing I've been vocal about is that the Jets need somebody in charge who's not Woody Johnson. Part of the problem with Woody Johnson is he hires a coach and he hires a GM separately, and then they all report to him, and Woody's ultimately the decider because nobody's really in charge. When nobody's in charge, the owner's in charge. If Belichick had been interested in the job, one thing I would say is that he would be in charge. Woody Johnson would be sidelined, which would have been a good thing. And also, I do think conceivably Belichick could have added instant credibility to this franchise in a way it has not had in a long time. But again, all of this is very moot. It was never really. It doesn't seem like it ever got very far down the road. It sounds like people are just overreacting to a very small story, which was Belichick kind of just taking the Jets' temperature rather than the Jets and Belichick actually going down the road and there being a realistic possibility of Belichick being the Jets head coach. And here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to talk about some people who do have a realistic possibility of being here next year. The first 2 Jets general manager candidates who are going to interview are now known. We'll talk about who they are and how they might fit as we continue here on this special Sunday morning edition of Locked On Jets. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. How do you stay cozy during the winter months? For some, wrapping in a blanket with a mug of hot chocolate or watching a movie with family is the best way to spend the month of December. Well, therapy is a great way to bring yourself some comfort that never goes away, even when the season changes. Therapy has a lot of benefits, including learning positive coping skills and how to set boundaries. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself, and it's not just for those who have experienced major trauma. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Find comfort this December with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is also brought to you by the College Football Playoff on TNT. It's that time of year. The College Football Playoff is back, and with a newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports' coverage of the College Football Playoff begins December 21st, starting with the College Football Playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern, leading into our first matchup, the Southern Methodist University Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. Then the Clemson Lions look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the College Football Playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Sunday morning. If you're new to the show, this is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday, and then bonus episodes for breaking news such as this. We now know the first 2 candidates who will interview for the Jets open general manager job. It's reported by Adam Schefter of ESPN. Former Titans general manager John Robinson will be one of the candidates, and so will ESPN NFL analyst Louis Riddick. Now, these are the first 2. I'm sure they won't be the only 2, but I have to say, if these are the first 2 candidates, I think we're off to a pretty solid start. John Robinson's a general manager I respect with the Tennessee Titans. There's been a lot of buzz about Mike Vrabel potentially being a Jets candidate. A lot of people are excited about him because Vrabel had some success with the Titans as a coach. Well, Robinson was the guy who built the teams Vrabel had success with in Tennessee. His drafting early in his tenure was quite good. I mean, I could give you some of the names he drafted: Jack Conklin, Derrick Henry, Kevin Byard, also Harold Landry, Jeffrey Simmons, A.J. Brown. Now, near the end of his tenure, there were some pretty bad picks, and that's the reason he's available right now. He was fired by the Tennessee Titans. The Titans drafting got a little shaky near the end of his tenure, but that's true of a lot of general managers. A lot of general managers are up and down, but Robinson's at least shown the ability to find impact players through the NFL draft. And again, he built a pretty solid team from Tennessee. If you like the job Mike Vrabel did, if you like the fact that he went to the playoffs 3 times, if you like the fact he went to the AFC Championship game, John Robinson was the guy who built those teams. So I think I think he's a guy I was hoping the Jets would interview. Now, I think a lot of people are going to speculate that if the Jets hire Robinson, Vrabel's automatically going to be the head coach. I'm not sure that's necessarily the case because we don't know the nature of their relationship right now. There actually were some rumblings near the end in Tennessee that Robinson and Vrabel weren't seeing eye to eye on things. So I would pump the brakes a little bit on the idea that Robinson and Vrabel are a package deal. Now, it's entirely possible that, those reports were overblown. It's entirely possible that even if they weren't overblown, that Robinson and Vrabel have patched things up since then. So I'm not saying you rule out Vrabel necessarily coming to the Jets if Robinson was hired, but I don't think it's necessarily a guarantee that Vrabel and Robinson would come together. That said, I do think John Robinson did a good job with the Titans, at least early in his tenure. Things fell off later in his tenure, but he's shown an ability to build a good football team. I think it's easy to criticize these general managers because they have a record. Guys who have never been GM before don't really have a record. So, I think sometimes we overrate them and we underrate the guys who have actually done the job. I know it's easy to point to the last couple of years in Tennessee with Robinson where things didn't go so well and say, well, maybe he's not that good, but he built a winning team. And even if he has like a similar trajectory with the Jets, even if he builds a winning team and then things fall off, he actually will have built a winning team here. We haven't had a winning team in a really long time with the Jets. So Robinson would instantly become, the best general manager the Jets have had in some time. I think he's a guy worth interviewing. Is he my first choice? Maybe not, but I think somebody who's definitely worth a look and somebody who's definitely worth an interview. And the other candidate is Louis Riddick, who's been on ESPN for quite a while. He's worked in NFL front offices in the past. He was with Washington from 2001 to 2007. Then he was with the Eagles from 2008 through 2013. He eventually rose to the position of director of pro personnel with the Philadelphia Eagles. Then he went to ESPN as an analyst. So this is not just like the Jets pulling a guy out of TV. A lot of people may remember 25 years ago, the Detroit Lions pulled Matt Millen like straight out of the TV booth. He was Fox's number 2 analyst at the time. This is not that. Matt Millen had like no credentials to run an NFL team. Louis Riddick actually rose through the ranks again. He rose to the position of director of pro personnel with the Philadelphia Eagles. Then he went to TV. So he's got a guy with a NFL with a front office background. I've always been impressed with his thoughts on team building. I think he's got a good head on his shoulders. I think he offers a lot of good analysis about the inner workings of how a team should function, also about building a culture, making sure a team functions correctly. What's interesting is he's been very critical of the job of Woody Johnson. So this is exactly the kind of guy I'd like. Somebody who's going to go in and tell Woody Johnson, you're wrong about the way you're doing things. And that's what Louis Riddick has done. Louis Riddick has spoken frequently about the dysfunction within the Jets organization, which really begins at the top. And again, he's a qualified candidate. Another thing I like about Louis Riddick is that he's got experience in the front office, but he's also been able to get away. He's also been able to kind of get a 30,000 foot view over the last 10 years or so, because when you're working for one team, you kind of have tunnel vision. You're just focused on what your team's needs are, what lies ahead for your football team. When you work as an analyst, sometimes, you get to you get to take a step back. You're not just focused on one team's need. You get to look at the league as a whole. You get to figure out what the best practices are, what the best teams are doing, what the worst teams are doing. You can kind of focus on all 32 teams and figure out what the best things to do are, what the worst things to do are. So I think this is off to a good start. Mike, we'll see who eventually gets the job, but these are two candidates who encourage me. These are two candidates I like. These are two candidates I frankly hope that the Jets would interview, because I think they're both qualified candidates. We'll see what happens. I'm not ready to declare this process a success, but I am pleased with these first two candidates. I think that Robinson and Riddick were both on my list of people I hope the Jets would interview, and apparently that's what they'll do. Anyway, that's all for this Sunday edition of Locked On Jets. After the game, we'll talk Jets Jaguars. Can't wait. Enjoy the game today. We'll chat after it.